King Lear is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare. It depicts the gradual descent into madness of the title character, after he disposes of his kingdom, giving bequests to two of his three daughters based on the flattery of him, bringing tragic consequences for all. Derived from the legend of Lear of Britain, a mythological pre-Roman Celtic king, the play has been widely adapted for the stage and motion pictures, with the title role coveted by many of the world's most accomplished actors. Originally drafted in 1605 or 1606, with its first known performance on St. Stephen's Day in 1606. The first attribution to Shakespeare was a 1608 publication in a quarto of uncertain provenance. It may be an early draft or simply reflects the first performance text. The Tragedy of King Lear, a more theatrical revision, was included in the 1623 First Folio. Modern editors usually conflate the two, though some insist that each version has its own individual integrity that should be preserved. After the English Restoration, the play was often revised with a happy, non-tragic ending for audiences who disliked its dark and depressing tone. But since the 19th century, Shakespeare's original version has been regarded as one of his supreme achievements. The tragedy is particularly noted for its probing observations on the nature of human suffering and kinship. Characters: Lear, King of Britain; Goneril, Lear's eldest daughter; Regan, Lear's second daughter; Cordelia, Lear's youngest daughter; Duke of Albany, Goneril's husband; Duke of Cornwall, Regan's husband; Earl of Gloucester, Earl of Kent, later disguised as Keys; Edgar, Gloucester's son; Edmund, Gloucester's illegitimate son; Oswald, Goneril's steward; Fool, Lear's fool; King of France, suitor and later husband to Cordelia; Duke of Burgundy, suitor to Cordelia; Couron, courtier; Old Man, tenant of Gloucester; Officer, employed by Edmund; Gentleman, attends Cordelia; servants to Cornwall; Knights of Lear's train; Officers, messengers, soldiers, and attendants. Synopsis: King Lear of Britain, elderly and wanting to retire from the duties of the monarchy, decides to divide his realm among his three daughters. King declares he'll offer the largest share to the one who loves him most. The eldest, Goneril, speaks first, declaring her love for her father in fulsome terms. Moved by her flattery, Lear proceeds to grant to Goneril her share as soon as she's finished her declaration. Before Regan and Cordelia have a chance to speak, he then awards to Regan her share as soon as she has spoken. When it is finally the turn of his youngest daughter, Cordelia, at first she refuses to say anything and then declares there is nothing to compare her love to, nor words to properly express it. She speaks honestly but bluntly, which infuriates him. In his anger, he disinherits Cordelia and divides her share between Regan and Goneril. The Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Kent observe that, by dividing his realm between Goneril and Regan, Lear has awarded his realm in equal shares to the peerages of the Duke of Albany and the Duke of Cornwall. Kent objects to Lear's unfair treatment of Cordelia. Enraged by Kent's protests, Lear banishes him from the country. Lear then summons the Duke of Burgundy and the King of France, who have both proposed marriage to Cordelia. Learning that Cordelia has been disinherited, the Duke of Burgundy withdraws his suit, but the King of France is impressed by her honesty and marries her nonetheless. Meanwhile, Gloucester has introduced his illegitimate son Edmund to Kent. Lear announces he will live alternately with Goneril and Regan, and their husbands. He reserves to himself a retinue of 100 knights, to be supported by his daughters. Goneril and Regan speak privately, revealing that their declarations of love were fake, and that they view Lear as a foolish old man. Edmund resents his illegitimate status, and plots to dispose of his legitimate older brother Edgar. He tricks their father Gloucester with a forged letter, making him think Edgar plans to usurp the estate. Kent returns from exile in disguise under the name of Keys, and Lear hires him as a servant. Lear and Keys quarrel with Oswald, Goneril's steward. Lear discovers that now that Goneril has power, she no longer respects him. She orders him to behave better and reduces his retinue. Enraged, Lear departs for Regan's home. The fool mocks Lear's misfortune. Edmund learns from Curan, a courtier, that there is likely to be war between Albany and Cornwall, and that Regan and Cornwall are to arrive at Gloucester's house that evening. Taking advantage of the arrival of the Duke and Regan, Edmund fakes an attack by Edgar, and Gloucester is completely taken in. He disinherits Edgar and proclaims him an outlaw. Bearing Lear's message to Regan, Keys meets Oswald again at Gloucester's home, quarrels with him again, and is put in the stocks by Regan and her husband Cornwall. When Lear arrives, he objects to the mistreatment of his messenger, but Regan is as dismissive of her father as Goneril was. Lear is enraged but impotent. Goneril arrives and supports Regan's argument against him. Lear yields completely to his rage. He rushes out into a storm to rant against his ungrateful daughters, accompanied by the mocking fool. Kent later follows to protect him. Gloucester protests against Lear's mistreatment. With Lear's retinue of 100 knights dissolved, the only companions he has left are his fool and Keys. Wandering on the heath after the storm, Edgar meets Lear, in the guise of a madman named Tom O'Bedlam. Edgar babbles madly while Lear denounces his daughters. Kent leads them all to shelter. Edmund betrays Gloucester to Cornwall, Regan and Goneril. He reveals evidence that his father knows of an impending French invasion designed to reinstate Lear to the throne, and in fact a French army has landed in Britain. Once Edmund leaves with Goneril to warn Albany about the invasion, Gloucester is arrested, and Regan and Cornwall gouge out Gloucester's eyes. As he is doing so, a servant is overcome with rage by what he is witnessing and attacks Cornwall, mortally wounding him. Regan kills the servant, and tells Gloucester that Edmund betrayed him, then she turns him out to wander the heath too. Edgar, in his madman's guise, meets his blinded father on the heath. Gloucester, not recognizing him, begs Tom to lead him to a cliff at Dover so that he may jump to his death. Goneril discovers that she finds Edmund more attractive than her honest husband Albany, whom she regards as cowardly. Albany has developed a conscience. He is disgusted by the sisters' treatment of Lear, and the mutilation of Gloucester, and denounces his wife. Goneril sends Edmund back to Regan, receiving news of Cornwall's death. She fears her newly widowed sister may steal Edmund and sends him a letter through Oswald. By now alone with Lear, Kent leads him to the French army, which is commanded by Cordelia. But Lear is half-mad and terribly embarrassed by his earlier follies. At Regan's instigation, Albany joins his forces with hers against the French. Goneril's suspicions about Regan's motives are confirmed and returned, as Regan rightly guesses the meaning of her letter and declares to Oswald that she is a more appropriate match for Edmund. Edgar pretends to lead Gloucester to a cliff, then changes his voice and tells Gloucester he has miraculously survived a great fall. Lear appears, by now completely mad. He rants that the whole world is corrupt and runs off. Oswald appears, still looking for Edmund. On Regan's orders, he tries to kill Gloucester but is killed by Edgar. In Oswald's pocket, Edgar finds Goneril's letter, in which she encourages Edmund to kill her husband and take her as his wife. Kent and Cordelia take charge of Lear, whose madness slowly passes. Regan, Goneril, Albany, and Edmund meet with their forces. Albany insists that they fight the French invaders but not harm Lear or Cordelia. The two sisters lust for Edmund, who has made promises to both. He considers the dilemma and plots the deaths of Albany, Lear, and Cordelia. Edgar gives Goneril's letter to Albany. The armies meet in battle, the British defeat the French, and Lear and Cordelia are captured. Edmund sends Lear and Cordelia off with secret joint orders from him and Goneril for the execution of Cordelia. The victorious British leaders meet, and the recently widowed Regan now declares she will marry Edmund. But Albany exposes the intrigues of Edmund and Goneril and proclaims Edmund a traitor. Regan falls ill, having been poisoned by Goneril, and is escorted off stage, where she dies. Edmund defies Albany, who calls for a trial by combat. Edgar appears masked and in armor, and challenges Edmund to a duel. No one knows who he is. Edgar wounds Edmund fatally, though he does not die immediately. Albany confronts Goneril with a letter which was intended to be his death warrant. She flees in shame and rage. Edgar reveals himself, and reports that Gloucester died off-stage from the shock and joy of learning that Edgar is alive. After Edgar revealed himself to his father, off-stage, Goneril, with all her evil plans thwarted, commits suicide. Soon after, Albany sends men to countermand Edmund's orders. Lear enters bearing Cordelia's corpse in his arms, having survived by killing the executioner. Kent appears and Lear now recognizes him. Albany urges Lear to resume his throne, but like Gloucester, the trials Lear has been through have finally overwhelmed him, and he dies. Albany then asks Kent and Edgar to take charge of the throne. Kent declines, explaining that his master is calling him on a journey. Finally, Albany or Edgar implies that he will now become king. Date and text. Although an exact date of composition cannot be given, many academic editors of the play date King Lear between 1603 and 1606. The latest it could have been written is 1606, as the Stationer's Register notes a performance on the 26th of December 1606. The 1603 date originates from words in Edgar's speeches which may derive from Samuel Harsnett's declaration of egregious popish impostures. In his Arden edition, R.A. Folks argues for a date of 1605–6 because one of Shakespeare's sources, the true chronicle history of King Lear, was not published until 1605. Close correspondences between that play and Shakespeare's suggest that he may have been working from a text. Conversely, Frank Kermode, in the Riverside Shakespeare, considers the publication of Lear to have been a response to performances of Shakespeare's already written play, noting a sonnet by William Strachey that may have verbal resemblances with Lear. Kermode concludes that 1604–5 seems the best compromise. Dr. Nasib Shaheen dates the play C1605–6 per line 1.2.103. These late eclipses in the Sun and Moon, which relates to the lunar eclipse of the 27th of September, 1605 and the solar eclipse of the 2nd of October 1605. The modern text of King Lear derives from three sources. Two quartos, published in 1608 and 1619 respectively, and the version in the first folio of 1623. The differences between these versions are significant. Q1 contains 285 lines not in F1. F1 contains around 100 lines not in Q1. Also, at least 1,000 individual words are changed between the two texts. Each text has a completely different style of punctuation, and about half the verse lines in the F1 are either printed as prose or differently divided in the Q1. The early editors, beginning with Alexander Pope, simply conflated the two texts, creating the modern version that has remained nearly universal for centuries. The conflated version is born from the presumption that Shakespeare wrote only one original manuscript, now unfortunately lost, and that the quarto and folio versions are distortions of that original. As early as 1931, Madeline Doran suggested that the two texts had basically different provenances, and that these differences between them were critically interesting. This argument, however, was not widely discussed until the late 1970s, when it was revived, principally by Michael Warren and Gary Taylor. Their thesis, while controversial, has gained significant acceptance. It posits, essentially, that the quarto derives from something close to Shakespeare's vowel papers, and the folio is drawn in some way from a prompt book, prepared for production by Shakespeare's company or someone else. In short, Q1 is authorial, F1 is theatrical. In criticism, the rise of revision criticism has been part of the pronounced trend away from mid-century formalism. The New Cambridge Shakespeare has published separate editions of Q and F. The most recent Pelican Shakespeare edition contains both the 1608 quarto and the 1623 folio text, as well as a conflated version. The New Arden edition, edited by R.A. Folks, is the only recent edition to offer the traditional conflated text. Both Anthony Nuttall of Oxford University and Harold Bloom of Yale University have endorsed the view of Shakespeare having revised the tragedy at least once during his lifetime. As Bloom indicates, at the close of Shakespeare's revised King Lear, the reluctant Edgar becomes King of Britain, accepting his destiny but in the accents of despair.